Christians. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and in verse 28, the Apostle Paul says the following. When it comes to those speaking in tongues or speaking in a language that the others in the meeting, church meeting, don't know, he says this: if there is no interpreter, if there's no one to interpret this unknown language, then let him keep silent in the church. In other words, if you have the gift of tongues or the gift of a language, and there is no interpreter for the person who needs to hear the gospel being preached in that language, if there's no interpreter, what Paul is basically saying here, in no uncertain terms, is to shut up. Keep your mouth shut. And then he goes on and says, let him keep silent in the church and let him speak to himself and to God. And he's not saying here, speak to God in tongues. He's saying simply that if there's no interpreter for you to exercise your gift of speaking in this unknown language, keep silent and speak to yourself and to God. In other words, speak intelligently to yourself and to God as you always have before you had this gift. He is not saying speak to God in an unknown tongue. He is simply saying speak to yourself and to God if there is no interpreter. Christians, I don't know why these things are so difficult. If you read the plain text of what Paul is stating, it is always through and through very clear. What's important is to be understood. In every case, when it comes to the conveyance of God's word, make sure that it is communicated articulately and clearly so that everyone can understand it. And if you are speaking in an unknown language, so that those unbelievers or those who are uninformed can understand, make sure there's an interpreter. And if there isn't one, be quiet, be provoked, and be persuaded.